Welcome to the Donovan Show. Today I'm going to talk about the difference between men and women via Charlie Kirk. I am a big fan of Charlie Kirk. I think he is a moral warrior in a culture that has completely lost objective truth. We are spiraling into moral decay, and there are just warriors out there that are so courageous, that are fighting the battle and also inviting us to greater courage. And, even 5 years ago, this conversation would be met with a lot of resistance because the way our culture, I think, has sort of evolved, starting from the feminist, I would say, radical feminist movement starting in 1840, we're seeing this agenda being forced that women can be men and that there is no difference, and that equality, the fight for equality, almost diminished our unique ability as women, our genius as both men and women, and our gender. And so any resistance against that was met with so much opposition up until I think the last 3 years. So last 3 years, the fight against the transgender movement became so radical that, you know, typically men and women who just didn't want to get into the fight said, you know what? This has gone way too far. The fact that I have to wrestle with men in women's bathroom, sports, this is not okay anymore. And I think that evil is in itself imploding, it is imploding in itself. And I think that we have to ask ourselves, what is our call in context of the state of our culture as a woman, in context of the season of life, as a mother, whatever it is, season of life you're in, single, and in context of our circumstance. I think the last 3 years, we have awakened, like most of, people, to, I would say, what was hidden underneath the moral decay has now come to surface. And we are faced with a question is, what do we do about it? And I think one of the things that we can intentionally do about it is to understand the lay of the land, understand the narrative, the conversation, and the culture war that's happening, not so we can um, sit in it and complain about it, but so we can actually understand it and then create logical, strategic, practical solutions to fight the culture war. Because make no mistake, this is on our doorstep. The fact that the line between what a woman is now completely blurred, as though it is not based on objective truth and biology, is so nonsensical. It's so illogical. And you're sort of like racking your brain, asking yourself, how did we even get here that we have to question how to define what a woman is? So, our role, I believe, as women, is to be defenders of truth, beauty, and goodness. And we cannot do that unless we understand the lay of the land, the call for the season, understand what is happening in our culture for the sole purpose of becoming part of the solution. So I'm going to break down here Charlie Kirk's, I would say, very witty understanding of men and women. And that's us learning what the narrative is in college campuses, what the narrative is politically, what the narrative is culturally, and let's see what is our role. And that's my main purpose of this podcast is, how can you then decide your call in context of your season, in context of the cultural war that is happening and that is impacting all of us and our family and our country. And I think that's a very important thing for us to recognize, is that there's a moral decay that's happening in our country. America is the land of the free. However, that freedom, which I believe is God given, is under attack. The freedom to be a woman, the freedom to um, uh, create a family that's based both on a man and a woman is under attack. The lines are so blurry. But here's the beauty with such darkness, is that the opportunity to become a light is also massive. When darkness abounds, it is when light shines even brighter. So to think about this in context of your um, role in your community, in your society. And it's not sort of this grand, how can I be a light in the world? Yes, that is exactly what we're doing. But how can I be a light in the world in my family, in my friendship, in my community? And how can we create awareness in what's happening and wake people up to the fact that this is a cultural war, but really it is a spiritual war that's been happening for decades. But now we are seeing it come to head. We are seeing it more than ever. And I think this is a good thing because it's waking us up to our call to defend what is true, good, and beautiful as a woman and never apart from it. So let's begin. So this is Charlie Kirk. And he's witty, he's sharp, and he could, kind of gives it straight up. I think that courage breeds courage. As I see men and women rise in courage, such as Charlie Kirk, I find myself also emboldened by the fact that, you know what? We just can't. We just can't be sheepish. We just can't stay quiet. And that silence is in some degree a form of compliance towards evil, towards defending what is good. And so it doesn't mean that you go out there and screaming, what the truth is. It means that you have to discern and decide your role in even speaking and defending the truth. So let's begin.
And comes to one of our events and he's like, I'm a woman, and he wears a dress. He's like, I want to be a woman. I'm like, are you sure you want to be a woman? You sure? God made different brains. There's a great study. This is
Okay. First, biological evidence is that our brains are made differently. I'm studying right now the female brain. It is, to me, quite astounding that we can't go into biological reasoning because even our brains are made differently, both male and female. And somehow we have negated the biological evidence of our difference when science is so clear. Well, maybe, as the neuroscience, as we learn to understand the brain even further, it's going to become clearer and clearer that the difference between men and women based on biology is so black and white. It is not blurry. And I'll also say that even in the pro-life movement, as it has emerged, as we continue to see technology rise, we can see evidence that life happens at conception and not at 13 weeks and not happens at 19 weeks. And it becomes very hard to defend some of these illogical understanding when you're met with science that's based on truth. The problem is the suppression of science and the lack of understanding of, I would say, good men and women who may be not equipped, such as myself. And this is why I'm studying the female brain. This is why I'm giving myself as much evidence as I can from a biological level so that I can give it to you and repackage it for you that men and women's brains are made differently. That itself should be enough of an evidence that there's a difference between men and women. Let's continue.
This is amazing. Have you heard this?
No, but I'm loving it.
Where they put men in a room alone with no distractions. And they asked the men after 30 minutes, what were you thinking of? And for no surprise, they said, sports, sex, or nothing. They did it with females. And this is what's so interesting. They said, what were you thinking? They were reviewing conversations that they had in the last couple of days.
Okay. If you're a female out there, is this accurate? Are you reviewing conversations throughout the day? Now, there is something that is important about reflecting on our conversation. We should be reflecting on our conversation on how to harvest wisdom, how we could make our skill better, how we could process and maybe learn through our conversations. But there is a point, and I'm just pointing this out, that it becomes a slavery to think about the conversations and think about what other people are thinking of us. So I'm just putting this out there as sort of a side note that even though that is what we gravitate to, that's what the comfort zone is, we go for the easy, it doesn't mean that that's what we need to do. And I think we need to pay attention. If you are someone out there who's constantly ruminating, the conversation and becoming a slave of those, it is something that is not healthy for us women just because we are wired perhaps naturally to go that route. Okay, let's continue.
Let me be very clear. No man in the history of the species has ever reviewed a conversation
I will push back on that with Charlie. I do think that there's men out there who reflect on the conversation so that they can learn from it. I know he was being sort of comical, but I just want to point out there that it is important to review the conversation, both men and women. But I do think that there are men also that are reflecting on the conversation and maybe does not have enough strength and emotional command to not be a victim of also ruminating negative thoughts. There are men out there that have been so, I would say, robbed of skill set, compounding that the emasculation of the radical feminism movement, that they have no emotional command. So they too have become like what women are naturally perhaps susceptible to, which is ruminating negative thoughts. So just want to highlight out there, I do think that there is a reason why men are wired not to be so sort of consumed emotionally what people think, because the way God designed men is that sometimes if we are at war or we need to do the hard stuff and they are consumed by their emotion, they will not be able to do it. If you go to war, you can't think with you can't be a victim of your emotion. You have to be so logical. You have to take action, and you almost have to sort of silence that part of you, because otherwise you can't get the job done. So part of actually the gift of men, whether we realize it or not, is that they have, I would say, greater emotional command, and that is necessary. Now, does it mean that men should not wrestle with their emotions, work through it, make sure they're not suppressing it? Absolutely not. I think that there is a healthy way to manage our emotions where we're not a victim of it, but we're also not suppressing it. And that, I think, is an important distinction. I think men heavily are not a victim to the emotion. And I think that's important because we do have men that have become a victim to uh, this emasculization of men, where they're incapable of um, managing their emotion in certain circumstances. Now, as a mom of 8, I have 4 boys. I am hyper aware of my boys, kind of riding that balance between, I need you to have greater emotional command, to also being empathetic with them. And so I cannot allow my boys to just wallow in their emotion nor ignore it. I have to make sure that I'm hyper aware that, I have a son that is more emotionally, I would say, sensitive. That's not a bad thing. Some men are wired more emotionally sensitive. So the skill that I'm building from him is actually more greater emotional resilience. And so even though I'm there from, he knows I'm there from, and he knows I have to look him in the eye and say, listen, I am here for you, but I also don't want to rob you of the emotional strength necessary in this moment in time to be in command of your emotion, not become a victim of it, to think fast, to see with resilience, because you're going to need this skill as a dad someday, as a father someday, or whatever it is that you're called to. But I also have a son that maybe is more logical and I have to actually work on this thinking about his emotion. Sometimes we're going through, we're playing a game and it's so logical. They want to prove themselves. I'm like, well, let's scale back. The way you're communicating yourself lacks emotion. So it really depends on you as a woman being hyper aware of the needs of the men around you. So understanding how men are wired, their brain, their strength, their weakness is imperative for us to equip the men in our lives. And that's why I think it's important for us as women to study the culture, to study men and women's brain, to have a deeper understanding. Why? So we know what skill to use, so we know what tools to use in different circumstances. Go.
We've had. Oh, man. I'm glad you're here. Yeah. God made our brains different. Not just our bodies, not just our parts, our brains different. And by the way, we both need each other. We need strong men in America. We need strong women in America.
Oh, I just love that. God made us different. Now, when I was studying theology and philosophy back in college, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago, we always understood the difference between men and women, but maybe from a moral perspective. And it wasn't necessarily biological. It was based on the Bible, it was based on moral truth, and it made total sense. And the complementarity of men and women, I remember I studied Christian marriage. It was so profound, it was so powerful, it made such logical sense. And now, there's no such thing as moral truth. There's no such thing as objective truth. And so you can believe whatever you want to believe. That's what our culture actually has, um, I would say, evangelized us to tell our children, is that it's very relativistic. But when we then go into the scientific route, such as we have, I think, as the improvement of science go, we cannot deny the difference between men and women biologically, the way our brains are made, physically, our structure. This is why men and women cannot compete the same in sport, because it is not equal. And the testosterones are different, and men have greater testosterones, which is necessary for their call to protect and provide for the family. Doesn't mean that women can't. I do. It just means that we don't usurp our unique ability as both men and women. And so we are different. That's the way God made it. And then he said, we need each other. That's the most profound thing for us to understand, is that we need each other, even biologically. Think about it. The world would cease to exist if men stopped being men and women stopped being women, and we no longer had children. We need each other to further go forth and multiply in the world. So the idea that we become less of a man and less of a woman, that we blur the lines, we're actually playing God and saying, well, we don't need each other. And from a very logical sense of view, from very, biological, what you're saying is that, well, how can the world continue if we no longer have this need for each other? This is true for family. You single mothers out there know the hardship that comes with raising a child by yourself, but also mothers out there that have, maybe you're both father and mother is present, but your maybe husband is checked out. What I can do for my son and my daughter is so different from what Ryan can do. And, I was just reading a study that the importance of a mother is to actually teach their children emotional command, awaken the empathy, but a father is sort of adventure and conquer. And I thought, Ryan's ability to do that is very different than my ability to do that. Not that I can't, not that I don't, not that I am, incapable. It's that whatever we are wired greatly towards, we have greater aptitude towards it. Therefore, it's a lot easier for us. Therefore, it becomes so natural for us. And I think both men and women assuming their rightful role, not just as a man and a woman, but also, developing their skill set and their mindset to assume their role as both in their men and women is so profoundly important in family life. So yes, we need each other in a way that we can't replace. Just all women society. I don't need a man. That's the radical feminist cry. I don't need men. Yes, we do need a man. And even those radical feminists that are saying I need a man, they have been wounded by a man. And if they could, they would want to be loved so deeply and intimately by a man. Because if you then look at a woman and say, what if the man that you admire the most loved you so deeply, that loved you into freedom, that cared for you, that loved you with a tenderness, they would melt. Because deep in our heart, what is etched is a deep desire for that union, because that's the way God designed us.
And the trans movement does not believe that. They believe womanhood is a costume. They believe that womanhood is something you wear on Halloween.
I do think that it is an insult to women when we are deduced to the physical. When it becomes when womanhood becomes an external definition based on a costume, based on makeup, based on what we wear. And even if you change, sort of your breast, and you have a surgery, your body, your brain, your makeup, your genetic, your testosterone, you can change all that. But really, you are fighting your very makeup, which is God given. I mean, right now we have, in the trans movement, people that are detransitioning and filing lawsuits because the transition is actually harming them. This is what we need to realize now. Does it mean that there are people that are not suffering gender dysphoria? Absolutely. But gender dysphoria, we do not help them by sort of making a mockery out of women. These people are really suffering and they need our help. But the way we are using transgender as a fad, as sort of this narrative and conversation, is actually a disservice to people that are genuinely suffering in gender dysphoria. So, what do we do as women? We need to pay attention to this. We need to push back against the narrative. We need to understand that, yes, there are people that are suffering, but no, being a woman is not just a costume, that there is a divine call that is etched right into our DNA, right into our very cellular level, that is God given, that we cannot deny. And that we have to teach our children that. We have to create communities that honor the distinction and the difference between men and women. And we need to make this a conversation. But more than anything, we need to live our womanhood so profoundly that it is no longer a question that women are different, that we cannot in any way live and pretend to be like men, and that we have to reassess who we are and say, what part of the radical feminist movement has seeped into my mindset? Now, I also believe that the radical feminist movement, the feminist movement in its complexity, has also sort of deviated and has had a lot of different branches. There's first wave feminism, which is the suffrage movement, the second wave feminism, which is, the sexual revolution. There is a good that we have taken from this movement. It is not, I would say, all bad. I think that just like any movement, we have to, as a woman in this generation, take all the good, but throw away the things that are harming us, such as blurring lines, a distinction between one and woman. I am here because women fought for my freedom. I am here also because the feminist movement also is responsible for women in the workplace and fighting for women in the workplace. So we have to acknowledge the good that they did. And these women were warriors. They fought. Now, do they do it all in a way that perhaps honor their dignity? No, we don't know each woman in what their situation is. I would say that perhaps the culture of men then, where for decades and hundreds of years, women's voices were silenced, there was a lot of perhaps pent up anger that was generational. Also, generational hatred towards men, because maybe men, in context of the way the culture was, did not have a deep respect for women's voices, women's ability to have the freedom to be a woman, and that became cultural. So I would venture to say that men did not have a great respect for women. They weren't included. They couldn't own a property. They were a property. So if we pause and say, well, maybe those radical feminists was a reaction to also decades and decades of usurping our freedom and respect. So we can't just sort of, cast them as sort of this evil women. Yes, they too have become a victim, and we have to see it as that. But our role is to harvest the good. We have the freedom, but we want the responsibility that comes with that freedom. It is not freedom to do whatever I want without regard for what is true, good, and beautiful, without regard for the boundaries, without regard for what makes men uniquely men and women uniquely women. I don't think that that's even where some of the feminist movement that started this and fought for it want to go, but it's gone so mad. The third wave of feminism and the fourth wave of feminism that perhaps we're currently living in, I do think that there's a fifth wave of feminism that I think, can usher, and that is freedom and responsibility. I think that is a fifth wave feminism. We have to take all the good from what we have gained from all the different waves of feminism, because it is the strongest movement in history, is the feminist movement. That should tell you so much about the strength of a woman. Now we have to honor that and not, I would say, cast them as just evil. Now, were there some that were perhaps evil and rooted in the satanic movement? Yes, you can do your own homework. There were. And there are. Some of them were based on eugenics. Margaret Sanger was based on eugenics. And yes, they're evil. But even God can make good out of evil, which is why I'm here, which is why you're here, which is why you can own a property, have a family, and have a voice in the marketplace. So that, I believe, is a fifth wave of feminism. A woman who is able to take the good in every situation and give herself the responsibility that comes with her freedom. Let's continue.
Prove me wrong, by the way. They think womanhood is just dressing in a dress and putting on makeup. How insulting to women. They think that being a man is talking in a deep voice and taking testosterone. How insulting to men. It's not a costume to wear. And instead of arguing with reality, let's get really to the basis of this. These people are mad at God.
Yep.
That's what this is.
They hate God. Yep.
I've never actually pondered that that was a possible reason. They are perhaps mad at God, but maybe because of their circumstance. As we know, a lot of the people that are suffering, whether it's, transgender or mental illness, it's because of some kind of trauma in their own life. It's because they have been wounded by people that maybe have become the face of God. As a mom of 8 children, I was always taught in the Montessori that I have come to love this teaching by Dr. Maria Montessori, that parents are the face of God. And the way I treat my child has everything to do with their foundation of the relationship with God. Now, I will say that yes, they are mad at God, but maybe they don't even know that it's God. Maybe because the face of God in their life has been those people around them that they were supposed to defend them and protect them and love them unconditionally, but they never received, and those became the face of God. These people probably don't even know who God is. They never even thought about the concept of God, and it's sort of a disorder within the truth, right? Because some of them might even believe in God, but the face of God that was modeled for them was actually not the version of God that we know as an unconditional loving God. Maybe it was an angry God based because of parents. Maybe it was a parent that has never resolved some of their pain, and therefore their child became, I would say, a victim to unhealed wounds. So yes, they are angry at God, but who are they really angry? Are the people probably that have modeled the face of God for them? And I think that's an important awareness, because we have to know that as parents, if you're a parent out there or a future parent, which if you're single out here and you're listening, you have a head start. You are the face of God. And you're also the face of God, not just for your children, but every time you walk out your door to the grocery store, to your the school, wherever you work, you are the face of God. And that sounds so kind of like, ooh, poetic. No, you are the face of God. And sometimes the face of God looks very, I would say, physical. They're going to see it quite as a physical manifestation, and what you dress, the way you talk, your body language becomes the first evidence of God. And this is why women, we have to present our highest and best self. We have to command our emotion, our language, our tonality, because that becomes the face of God, not so we can become an end in itself, but because we can become a vessel towards truth, beauty, and goodness, which is the face of God. And so nothing ought to be wasted, because people are walking around today angry with God and not even knowing who God is. And if we can do a better job modeling who God is with every fiber of our body, then that's how we evangelize. Because evangelization, I believe right now, does not look a lot like preaching and teaching. It looks a lot like incarnating truth, beauty, and goodness. I think beauty can save the world. As Dostoevsky said, proclaim. I've been pondering that, I would say, truth. Beauty can save the world. A beautiful woman, a beautiful conversation, a beautiful marriage, a beautiful home, a beautiful friendship, a beautiful career, a beautiful adventure. Because truth is refutable in a world that's relativistic. Logic is refutable in a world that's become so illogical and emotional. But beauty is irrefutable. It's an experience of truth, beauty, and goodness. And in beauty, you will also find truth and goodness. Beauty cannot be apart from truth and goodness. And this is why it's so important for women to understand that our role to dignify ourselves, and to understand that I'm not talking about the kind of beauty that's physical. I'm talking about the kind of beauty that inspires the world. How do we define a beautiful woman? A woman that can inspire the world to be better. It's not physical, but it's partly physical. because we are physical beings. You can't just say, well, I'm just going to be beautiful on the inside and I'm going to look like a trash on the outside. That is also negating God's gift that we've given. We have to look good on the outside and we have to look beautiful in the inside, good in the inside. And what I mean by that is that our hearts are pure, that we dress for the sole purpose of contributing good to the world, not so we can be the end itself. All of that is a mastery of ourself. All of that is a mastery of gift. All of that is an opportunity and not something that we could be, we could waste. And it's just something that we need to pay attention to.
These people do not believe there is no God. Some of them do. These are the people that are scorning and screaming, why didn't you make me in a different body? That wouldn't solve it. You got a soul problem, man. You're angry at the divine. That's what's really going on here, is that you are too prideful. And again, I will say narcissism, the most narcissistic generation in history, is also the most suicidal generation in history because they're thinking about themselves all the time.
One evidence of narcissism is that they're incapable of thinking outside of themselves. The world revolves around them. Now, if you're a parent out there and you cater to your child without boundaries and you entitle them to everything without having to work for it, we could be endangering our children to become narcissistic, even though our intention is to love them. We give them the world without having to earn anything, that we don't allow them to experience pain and hardship and struggle because we want the best for them. And who doesn't? What parent? But to rob our children of suffering or the maturity that the world doesn't revolve around them would endanger them to become narcissistic. And you might be doing everything you can and so good, and you're providing everything for your children almost to a fault that they are incapable of sacrificing themselves is dangerous to themselves. Now, we need to pay attention to how this is being played out in our home, in our parenting. We carry our children's backpack. We make our children's lunches. When we solve our children's problem for them, when we talk to the teacher because our children is having an issue with the coach, instead of allowing our children to walk through the suffering or the courage to maybe wrestle with it, and then we accompany them in the journey. I mean, these are things that if we do not allow our children to work through the struggles of life, how are they ever going to live, their life outside of the world? Because the truth is that the world does not and will never be revolved around them, what they feel and what they think. And so for them to grow up that it does, now they're not saying the world revolves around the way I think, but the moment it doesn't, they are thrown out of equilibrium. They are stressed and anxious. Why? Because they're so worried about not getting what they want because they're so accustomed to it. I mean, this is a dangerous precedent. The most narcissistic culture generation in the world is also the most provided for generation of the world, where we have parents that have achieved a level of materialism and want to give that to their children. I mean, there's a correlation between having so much and our children actually growing up to not appreciate what they have because they haven't earned it. So
I'm not happy. I'm not this. Yeah, it leads to people killing themselves in record numbers. Suicide's a real thing. Ever think that maybe we're telling young people they are the most important person ever? It leads to actually self-harm.
we tell our children they're the most important thing. Yes, they are the most important thing ever, but the world does not revolve around them. And pay attention to our language. Are we always talking about us? Mother Teresa had a great quote. It's like, when you're talking about, and I'm paraphrasing, about you, there's a danger because words become flesh. And all we ever talk about is me, 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 me. I'm sorry, me, me, me. She was saying me, me, me. What about me? And there's a country song, enough about me. What do you think about me? Even in sometimes pay attention to how you go into the parties and these conversations, people just talk about themselves. Maybe they've never been heard. Maybe they're deprived of somebody listening to them, but people are so consumed about who they are. All they talk about themselves. And you know this because you say one word and all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, I totally get it. This is what happened to me. And then it's them again for the next 20 minutes. If that's you, pay attention to it because it's very rampant. You might be surprised if you start to pay attention to how much people talk about themselves.
Counterintuitive, isn't it? And I'll prove it to you in a second. Self-esteem is one of the worst things that we started teaching in our schools. I'll prove it to you.
In the women's school, I don't actually talk about self-esteem. I talk about self-worth. And it's interesting that he's saying that because I never sort of thought of it that way, but understood that self-esteem, I think, led to this me, 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 me. Yes, we need to like ourselves, but it's okay for also not to like ourselves so that we can keep growing. And so that's why, in the women's school, we teach a lot of very, I would say, simple concept with a lot of depth that's based on a lot of cultural understanding. And this is one of them, is that I train about the rewiring of your unconditional worth and not just your self-esteem.
This is narcissism. The trans movement is everybody look at me, everybody pay attention to me, everybody give me what I want. Instead, you should be like, yeah, you're not the most important person in the world. God loves you. He loves you so much that you got to improve yourself.
Ah, that's so good. You're not the most important people in the world, right? It's like we try to make a fuss. We sometimes see um, it's become such a fad that people do it to actually harness attention. But then he said, God loves you. God's love you so much that he wants you to improve yourself. It's like we came in as a baby with a clean slate, and our role is to develop ourselves to become fully who God created us to be. But to sit in the victim mentality that, oh, well, this is me, take it or leave it. I'm made this way. This is who I am. That's actually rooted in the fixed mindset, which is I talk a lot about in the women's school as well, but also really rooted in pride. It's like, I can't change. I don't need to change. And this is me and take me for me. And this whole idea is like, love me for me. Well, yes, I'm going to love you for you unconditionally, but I'm also going to love you enough to challenge you that you can grow better than and become a higher version of yourself.
Lot. Go on a journey like Abram in Genesis 12.
I love
Go
it.
on an adventure. And God is going to have all sorts.
Go on an adventure. The biggest divine adventure that we can ever partake is the adventure of rediscovering the depths of who we are, to wrestle with who we are. I mean, that is the divine adventure. But to never have self knowledge and self awareness is to never learn to love ourselves, because you can't love something you do not know. And if you do not know yourself as a woman, then you can't fully love yourself, which then means you're incapable of loving the other fully. This idea of love your neighbor as you love yourself. How can you even love your neighbor if you don't love yourself? So this is not a micro, I would say, teaching. Loving yourself requires self-knowledge and self-development to love yourself enough to improve yourself. Right? If you're a woman of faith out there and you're not improving yourself, it's like you bearing your talent. If you're, a woman of faith out there and you're saying, well, this is the way God made me, and this is it, and this is God's will for me. Well, is it God's will for you to become a lesser version of yourself or to aspire to heights of greatness? I mean, it's a really important, a very simplistic question that we often maybe lose sight of. We ought to be developing ourselves. It's the parable of the talents.
Sorts of different unexpected miracles for you. But first, you have to repent. You have to understand that there is a God and you are not him. And God designed you with a purpose. But let me get to the self-esteem thing.
Well, we have taken God out of our schools, out of our government, out of every context. So now we are wondering why people are so godless. Well, he's not available in the infrastructure of our culture. So, I am a bit more sympathetic, I would say, as a woman, because how can you even teach somebody if it's not even available, right? I'll tell you the story about somebody I love so deeply, and she does not practice her faith, and I didn't either growing up. And then in my college, I really developed, I would say, conversion and develop a relationship with God. I've always sort of respected her in her journey, because um, I just love her for who she was. I wasn't trying to convert her. Anyway, one day, I would always sort of drop seeds of wisdom about faith, but I just left her where she was. And one day we were kind of praying, and I was praying the Our Father with her. We were doing the rosary, and I invited her to do it if she wanted to. And it was interesting to me because she actually didn't know the Our Father. And it dawned on me, nobody ever taught her what it meant to have a relationship with God. Nobody even taught her the Our Father. I realized she went to public school. Her parents did not teach her about the faith. And so I became kind of almost shocking that she was such a good person when nobody even showed her God. It was not in the infrastructure of her home life or the society or the school that she's in. And then here I was sort of to drop seeds of wisdom, which is obviously good. But I couldn't blame her for something she had never really even experienced. Nobody ever showed her how. Why is that important? We often blame people for the choices nobody ever showed them how to make. Now, as women, we need to push back. When people start to blame people and we start to kind of wonder, why are they so bad? Well, go back into their story and see how God was modeled in their life. And maybe we would be more sympathetic.
So there was a very interesting psychologist recently who had an opportunity to talk to dozens of school shooters, a very dark thing, right? Like darkness beyond our imagination. It's one thing to kill yourself, which again, I don't mean to minimize, but it's happening in a very huge way. And if you're struggling with that, get help, ask this church for help. There is help that awaits you, okay? I've lost friends to suicide, I've lost coworkers to suicide, it's a real thing. But even worse than killing yourself, imagine taking a weapon and going to a school and killing young kids. It's like beyond anything we could even comprehend, right? This psychologist came and he was blown away after talking to the 10th or the 20th or the 30th school shooter. He said, every single one of these shooters does not have a guilt problem. They're not like ridden with guilt. They're not walking around with heaviness. They said, they're all narcissists.
Okay, very important point. Who is teaching our children to process their thoughts and their emotion, to have an examination of conscience, to question their actions, their thoughts, and their behaviors as a way of being? Because guilt requires us to process our behavior. And if they lack the skill of actually first pausing, taking knowing questions to ask themselves, creating an environment where you can actually ask a question. A lot of times with my children, I really emphasize the importance for them to get up in the morning and to read and pray before they start their day, to create that rhythm of life and their routine and to create that infrastructure. And as teenagers, they fight you, but who's teaching to create this infrastructure of reflection in a world that's going so fast, so busy, one thing to another, where they don't have the infrastructure and they really probably don't know how to ask? So before even guilt is possible, the skill of reflection is necessary. Do you agree?
I want you to think about that. That the people that are committing the worst crimes imaginable are the furthest, most radical, understandably radical extension of the self-esteem movement. That they think they are so important that they want the whole world to look at their final crime. Whoa. Where instead of teaching self-esteem to young people, we should be teaching them self-control.
Oh, I love the difference. Self-control is one of the most important skill men need. Women too, but more men, and data is telling us. But think about self-control in the conversation of our school system and in our home life. And in your own life right now, how do you exercise delayed gratification and self control? The idea is that we can just think whatever we want to think, feel whatever we want to feel, do whatever we want to do. I mean, this is exactly why we have this narcissistic world, because we have no control of our thoughts. What do women want to control? Circumstances, situations, as opposed to our thought process based on the circumstance and situation. This skill level is so crucial. Now, you can't escape a prison unless you know you're in one. If you don't even know that self-control has made you suffer unnecessarily, you won't even know that you need to fix it. Having control of what? Our thoughts is a key ingredient to what? Consistent peace of mind and peace and joy, to control the things that are not healthy to think about. To have command of our thoughts leads to greater emotional command, emotional regulation. This is something that we have to be aware of.
Come on. When you tell an 8th grader, you're perfect the way you are. I remember being...
What meme? It's a walking error. You're perfect the way you are. You don't need to change. You're perfect. I mean, honestly, right? We're not perfect. We're not born perfect. As a matter of fact, be perfect as your heavenly Father actually comes from the root word perfect. Greek word means teleos. Teleos means to be whole. That's actually the root word from Scripture. So that's why we have the wholeness school. That's why The woman's school is based on a whole version of ourselves as a woman, because when parts of us are hurting, inevitably it becomes a cancer to every part of our life. And so, this idea of you're perfect the way you are is really an insult to our potential.
Being taught that as a freshman in high school, and we had this stupid sign in our classroom, you're perfect the way you are. And I turned to my teacher, I said, then why am I here? Why am I doing my homework? Why do my math problems? Why improve if I'm perfect the way I am? So then people will say, well, Charlie, what message would you prefer? You're not all that you could yet be.
Come on.
That's a much better message.
You are not all that you could yet be for the rest of our life. Because we have mothers who think that they can, that they should stop growing because now they're mothers, they need to stop learning. We have women in their mid 40s that are saying there's no need to grow because now I'm in my mid 40s. I know everything that I need to know about being a mother. Then you go into this midlife crisis because an unprocessed life that lacks growth becomes a very heavy burden. And then we go into the later years of our life, into retirement, and we say, well, I don't need to learn anything new. This is a reality. Growth equals progress. Progress leads to greater fulfillment and happiness. That is the evidence that we have. People that are progressing are happier. That if we're not progressing, that we are actually unfulfilled. Why? Because stagnant water stinks. If we are stagnant of our own growth, we are made for growth. We are made for the rest of our life to evolve into a higher version of ourselves. And that's why, when we think and we create a culture where women stop growing, mothers stop growing, stop learning, stop engaging into, I would say, a meaningful conversation, we then rob women of greater fulfillment, both men and women. We have to create a culture and rebuild a culture based on growth, based on being a student of ourselves, of the culture and the world, based on what? Becoming a constant higher version of ourselves. It's that aspiration. I love it. It's called the ascension. And as a Catholic, I love it because there's a part of the rosary where we ascend to our highest self. And I do think that there is this call for us to ascend to our highest self every day of our life, every season of our life, as a woman and never apart from it.
Message for a young person. That you got to put in the work. Self-gratification is a deeper society. Now, delayed self-gratification, preventing yourself from self-perpetual indulgence.
This is why pursuing a dream that is so big, it makes you fall into your knees, it humbles you, and it teaches you delayed gratification. Because if you're not dreaming of something so big, which is what we teach in the woman's school, then there's no need for delayed gratification. You can achieve it pretty quickly. But if you have a dream so big that God has placed in your heart and you choose and decide to chase that dream, you realize that what you are faced with is actually your own limitations and the need for your growth. Therefore, a big dream then humbles you and reminds you that delayed gratification is what actually chisels your virtue. So to chase a dream so big where you have to actually be patient with yourself is a necessary training for all women. This is why a dream is crucial. This is why to pursue something greater than our current self that we could never imagine is possible in our lifetime is not only necessary, it is imperative to actually fulfilling our unique and irreplaceable call, God given call. And that's why a woman without a vision perishes. What is a vision? It is to aspire for something that we never thought was possible. It can't be just sort of a goal. There's a distinction between a goal and a dream. And this is why it's important for us to teach women how to dream. This is why we teach the distinction between goal setting and dreaming in the women's school. This is why so much of my training is casting a vision and learning how to do that in a very, I would say, impractical, but also practical way. To know how to decide the dream of the season is so crucial. Why? Because you're faced with what? The opportunity to become a greater version of yourself every day of your life when you're aspiring for that dream. It's true for me. The woman's school has crucified me, has given me the cross that I need to actually walk into who I was created to be continually. It humbles me, it challenges me, but it also gives me the resurrection that I need to be fulfilled, to know that this is not just about me, to know that the work that I do in the woman's school is changing lives and that it continues to, but also it's changing me. It's changing who I am. It's it's me actually walking into some painful delayed gratification. It's necessary. The alternative is to bury our talent.
So there's a lot there, Steve, but it all comes back to biblical principles. As we have discarded the Bible in Western society, we're in moral chaos.
Yes.
And only the church, only Christians, only the truths of the Bible can get us back on track.
Okay. So to me, this is, I would say, an invitation to us profoundly living truth, beauty, and goodness as a way to incarnate the church and the Bible, because we have to be strategic about bringing truth back. And I don't think the world is listening, especially if you're out there and you see the scandals in the church. Apologetics has to come almost after the apologetic, where you're winning people with natural law to give them a path to biblical principles, because our word has become so void of God that they need to see reason. Faith and reason are not incompatible, they are in harmony. But I think we need to lead with reason, which we have so much evidence both biologically, but also based on natural law, based on also data. And then we invite them towards truth. And then we become a walking model of what truth, beauty, and goodness is. And I think this is how beauty can save the world, as Dostoevsky said, where we become a vessel towards truth by the way we live profoundly our femininity and our feminine genius. And I think that this is the opportunity of the fifth wave feminism, is living our feminine genius in a way that honors both our freedom, our dignity, and take responsibility on our God-given call and our talent. Thank you so much. If you like this podcast, please like it and share it. I'm grateful for you. Please post your comments below, any questions, and I'd love to be able to serve you even more by responding to your comments. So go forth and conquer, and let's make this world be whole. Till the next podcast.